The girls did not expect that the power of the so-called S-class adventurer could be so terrifying. Others took a year to clear the game, but Mr. Rick only took 4 days and defeated the enemy within 25 seconds every time. This incredible scene immediately broke her heart. You need to know that to advance to the main round, you must win 40 consecutive games. You have to run all over the country, and the distance between each place is at least 100 kilometers. Therefore, most people will prepare for it a year in advance. But obviously this difficulty is not difficult at all. He actually only took 4 days. He has won 40 games, and this makes him happy because he is not in the same division as the enemy in the other division, which is the master level Lars from Xi'an, which also makes him there is absolutely no hope of entering the finals, but even so he must defeat that man. Lynette didn't understand what the woman was thinking about this, but before she could ask who the man was, the waiter who suddenly appeared interrupted their conversation and said that he needed help because of a shortage of manpower. Mr. Rick was finished. After today's match, before she could take a breath, a man suddenly came up to her. He claimed to be the president of the Western League Committee. But he didn't expect to meet Mr. Rick by chance. It turned out that he had heard about the man's speed through the Western League, so he had already admired him a little because of his name. In comparison, Mr. Rick did recognize that he was a boxer at a glance, and he guessed it is true that the president has indeed been a boxer for some time and has achieved some results. However, he retired when he was 23 years old, for the specific reason, he did not want to reveal too much. He only said that this year's competition will actually be held.
では、そう皆さんによろしくお伝えください。あまりはしゃぎすぎないように。お体をおいたわりくださいと。
When Mr. Rick returned to the shop, Cat Lady immediately found him and reminded Rick that the person just now was from the Dragon Chamber of Commerce. Although he looked like a gentleman on the outside, there were always rumors that he had connections with the underworld. Mr. Rick was also a little surprised. After all, it seemed that the woman had a good relationship with the Angelica family and was the main sponsor of this year's competition. Thinking of this, a passerby mentioned that the level of this year's bunny girls was very high, especially the new dark elves. So out of curiosity, Mr. Rick came to the scene to check it out, but he didn't expect to actually see such an amazing sight. Forget Angelica, even Lynette was dressed like this.
Rick-san, どうかする?
Then the next morning, Mr. Rick told Angelica the news that President Dragonman had come, but the strange thing was that he said he didn't know the person. In the next game, Mr. Rick found that Angelica was clearly absent. Obviously her advantage was speed, but she chose to fight with the power she was least good at. Although she won in the end, it also consumed a lot of energy. Something unexpected was about to happen. In the end, she won. During the fight, Angelica's speed, which she was proud of, slowed down due to excessive physical force blows. This also made Rick a little worried, so he waited until the game. Then, he took the initiative to find Angelica and wanted to ask her what happened. Today's opponent was defensive and had to use direct confrontation attrition tactics.
Angelica! 嫌です! から勝てる試合だったはずだ! いちいち! それぞ! 俺じゃあんまり...
After getting to know each other in depth, Rick finally realized that the Dragon Man Guild leader who came to his house before was actually Angelica's fiancé. The cause of everything started a year ago. Since the death of both of his parents, the territory had been changed by their family. His business was bad and he was in a financial crisis because of it. At that time, his grandfather, who had always been stingy, suddenly stepped in and made a deal with the dragon leader. He said that he could provide high financial assistance, but the condition was to sign a marriage contract with Angelica. Although he had worked hard to improve his financial status, it was still too late to cancel the engagement. However, Angelica said that was not the point. Just as he was about to say it, a fight suddenly broke out in the hotel next to them. Everyone present wanted to stop him, but they didn't move because let alone them. Even Xiaopeng, a boxing fighter, was not a match for the Dragon Man. Then after easily throwing away the food that was ruining the scenery, he immediately wanted to taste his prey. However, at this time, Angelica was about to step forward and attack with her sword. Rick, who was pressing, took timely action to block the attack.
まあまあ、一旦落ち着きましょう。てめえはギースにしてトーナメントまで自重してくれんか。どけ。
It turned out that the Dragon Man was actually the president's younger brother, and he was also the #1 seed he sent to compete. Because the younger brother was very strong, but his temper was troublesome and he left quickly, so there was no accident. Later, after solving the problem here, the enemy immediately left here. This also made Rick even more curious about the relationship between the president who sponsored the competition and Angelica's engagement. It turned out that the bride price for the previous engagement conversation was very large. He also asked someone to check the assets of the Dragon Chamber of Commerce, but the results were far from that, so he guessed that the enemy must want to make money in this competition. Rick also remembered that there was a large flow of gambling money in this competition. The implication of making money through this is to counter match fixing, so that Angelica can cancel the engagement if she wins the game. But unfortunately, her current strength is not enough to fight it.
俺が鍛えてやろうか。
私、今、殺人予告されてますの？
The girl never expected that the so-called S-level training could be so terrifying. As soon as she started, she had to take 4 iron balls and run around the mountain for 25 hours. She saw the first enemy being able to keep running for just one training also made Rick look at Angelica with admiration. After all, she had died 3 times during her first training, but even so, she at least managed to survive the first day. But Rick couldn't understand that it was only noon, so there would be afternoon training in an hour.
じゃあ1時間後にまた。
Time passed until the 5th day. In order to avoid the horrific training of killing people, Angelica deliberately found a relatively secluded place to laze around and was very confident that the hero would never find her.
痛いだしたよ。
When Angelica bumped into him, she thought that Rick was here to scold her, but Rick said otherwise because he understood the mood of others who wanted to escape. From that, she had escaped dozens of times that year. But in the end, she died tens of thousands of times. It was an experience she would never forget in her life. Her super healing magic was to save her. Even in serious cases, she didn't care about death. Although she thought about giving up in the middle, the senior asked her to torture the soul, which was to eliminate the regret after giving up in the pain now on a scale and compare the two to see which one she could accept. So from then on, Rick no longer had the idea of running away. This sentence resonated with Angelica had obtained the aristocratic Sanskrit Lu sister. What she wanted was not a common noblewoman, but her status as a warrior brought honor to her family, so she became the first female-only knight in history.
私の天秤はまだ今の苦痛側に傾いて。
そうだな。
Then after discussing, Rick also decided to teach Angelica the first move. Since the opponent's fighting method was integrated with the swordsmanship of the knights, Master Rick thought that the movement of drawing the empty hand into the sword was suitable. To make it easier to understand, Rick decided to teach Angelica the first move. Lynette, an expert in this field, was specially invited. After a few days, Angelica finally reached the moment to show off the results of her training. As expected, Angelica immediately killed someone several times larger than her with just one blow.
出てますね。
ちょっと修行範囲にな。
Then they successfully reached the 16th bridge. Before entering the finals, everyone had to compete in a one-on-one group match. The most interesting were the priests of the Dragon Chamber of Commerce and the orc Kelvin who had the triple crown. It was also a game. Before the start, Angelica discovered that there was a problem with the matching mechanism. The organizer completely avoided the collision between the strong and the strong, so a fake match had begun. As long as the previous priest left a strong impression, everyone would bet on him, and then find the right time to deliberately lose the game to get huge dividends. Therefore, Angelica speculated that she would win in the second game. When encountering a priest, all they need to do is destroy them to disrupt their plans to be touched.
なあ、アンジェリカ。
決まってますわ。
そこは考えてなかったのか。
The next first game was a priest game, and he showed great strength from the beginning. The opponent's attack was like scratching an itch in front of his eyes. Then when he got bored, he killed his opponent with a casual punch. Although he felt the power of the priest, he saw his movements like a layman. Although very subtle, this game left a strong impact on him. After leaving his side, Rick and his team had successfully advanced to the next game. Time was running out. The last game today was also the most anticipated because they could finally witness the power of the champion Kelvin. When the referee announced the start, before he could react, Kelvin punched his opponent away, even though no one else saw it. But Shangui could tell at a glance that this was a unique future performance tool of the Dog Man. He could predict the enemy's actions in the next second and then rush to counterattack. The time soon arrived for the second round the next day. The first match of the day was Angelica versus the priest. Just as Rick was looking forward to it, the dragon leader came up to him and asked. This was a little surprised to get such a position even though he had a VIP seat. The president also said that it was a match between his brother and his fiancée, so he wanted to get closer to watch the other side as well. Approaching the priest before the match started and threatening to let him go. The enemy wanted to see the results of his hard work, but the priest slightly dismissed it because according to him, hard work was only for fools. A genius like him could have a strong body even without exercise, so for my sister's sake, he will be merciful and not kill you.
2回戦の始まりです。キースリダレクト対アンジェリカ・ディルムント。
Then when the game started, Angelica first used her smooth legs to test. As expected, her attacks could not cause any damage to the priest, so she decided not to hide anymore and planned to use the newly learned move. The match between Angelica and the priest had just begun, although it was only superficial. She also saw the results of her training. After learning this trick, Angelica did not hesitate to integrate magic power into herself, and then immediately released a burst of magic power that was greater than usual. Even so, it would cause a great burden on the body. But fortunately, I had undergone a month of held training before, so this was not a line slash at all. Combined with the speed of the feat, it could be said that this was Angelica's strongest killer move at the moment. Seeing the priest slowly fall into a disadvantageous position, but he just laughed out loud because he knew that his brother had not used his full strength. Remember when he was still a boxing fighter, he retired after competing with his half-brother, the priest, because from then on he understood what genius was. The gap between him and ordinary people. Even if the priest didn't need to exercise, he could have all the elements needed to fight. He remembered to explain the misunderstanding to Master Rick. It turned out that Angelica thought she would use the priest to fake the match, but in fact, she didn't need to use that little skill at all. When the priest's chances were still very high, she had already spent a lot of money on the opponent. Now she just needed to wait. If the priest won the championship, she would gain fame and fortune. During their conversation, Angelica on the stage was indeed beaten black and blue by the priest. Showing mercy for the sake of the president. I didn't expect you to be so naive. Thinking that she could beat me, she grabbed Angelica's twin tails and wanted to humiliate me, but at this time, Angelica still refused to admit defeat. After the game, Mr. Rick also found the priest alone. The priest looked at the angry human in front of him. He did not realize the seriousness of the matter. It was rare for him to meet such a high-quality prey, and had never experienced it. Paying more attention is just to make the opponent mentally prepared for tomorrow. Rick will not be as calm as before. He just wants to solve this problem as soon as possible. After the battle, he went to see Angelica's injury and found that her opponent was not there at the moment, temporarily relieved that her life was not in danger. Master Danger and the champion Kelvin also won successively. The top 4 places in the competition gradually became smaller. However, Mr. Rick was ready to compete the next day. There was no other reason than to apologize for losing the game. Mr. Rick also said that he was also at fault. After all, Angelica had worked very hard, but she did not see the enemy's strength clearly. Then the next first scene was Rick versus GC. He didn't pay attention to Master Rick, who was also a human, at first, but he didn't react until he was hit was a coincidence. However, the next second he was slapped in the face again. Although others didn't see it, the master of Master Rick saw that it was a body control skill that penetrated the surface of the body and acted directly on the body. No matter how high the opponent's surface defense was, as long as he was hit by this move, he would naturally suffer internal injuries. In short, it was real damage. Seeing that he could be hurt by a human, GC decided to be a little more serious and then used the strengthening magic on his hand. The dragon claw had grown, and this was the unique dragon transformation of the dragon man. Once this skill was used, it would not only strengthen the user's attack and speed, but even his defense would increase greatly, would temporarily fall into. Seeing this scene against the wind, the president who was present in the audience also said that this was a natural result. However, the ghost did not think so, because for the male lead, the audience's opinion was not important. What was important was Angelica's thoughts after watching it. When thinking like this, GC on the stage finally realized something was wrong. She had been attacking from start to finish, but Rick did not shed a single drop of blood even though she did not realize it. Lynette saw it was one of the body control skills. This flow technique could eliminate the damage received in the body. As the name implies, it is absolute dominance over the body and avoids injury. The disadvantage is because she deliberately limited her physical strength. Angelica was at the same level. Although Rick agreed with GC's talent that he had reached this point without training, but compared to a true genius, he was just a little Kurami. There were too many geniuses. In his opinion, the reason why the enemy considered him the strongest in the world was only because he happened to meet an opponent who could defeat him. After all, this world was still too big. Yan GC also suddenly realized that he had been underestimated and prepared himself. No longer hiding his strength, he planned to use a high-level magic unique to the dragon race. Seeing this scene, everyone was shocked, because GC was no longer just a dragon. His body shape was even comparable to a real dragon.
ハエでもいたか。金属だな。さらに焦げ荒れた体だな。勝てる気。ようやく理解したのか、バカ。
After a simple test, Mr. Rick also understood that the enemy's confidence was always there. If he were to face Angelica now, he would indeed not be able to defeat her in any way. After speaking, Rick arrived in a flash. Before GC could react, his opponent was punched and sent flying, followed by another teleportation attack. Seeing this, Angelica immediately understood that this was a smooth movement, and it was no exaggeration to say that the strength he displayed at this time was the result of a year of training. When he realized that he still couldn't defeat his opponent after a month of desperate efforts, he would have to work hard for another year to win. At that time, which side would his strength lean towards?
愚問ですわね。
終わりにするか。
空気を感じて待った
やっぱ俺が使うとダメだな。アンジェリカとの試合じゃなくてよかったな。